Hey everyone, Pat Fitzmaurice of Fantasy Pros. Let's talk about the 15 safest players to draft in 2024 fantasy leagues. Yes, we want players with high upside, but it's also important to balance your portfolio with some safer players who have high floors and are affordable. Before I start, if you want a chance to win a signed Joe Burrow helmet for free, courtesy of our friends at pristineauction.com, all you need to do is head to fantasypros.com/contest, complete the form, and either download the Fantasy Pros Draft Wizard app, leave a review for the podcast, or follow us on X, Instagram, or TikTok at Fantasy Pros. The more actions you complete, the more chances you'll have to win. We will be announcing a winner right here on the podcast, so if you're watching on YouTube, be sure to subscribe and turn on those notifications so you can be alerted when new episodes are up and to claim your prize. We're all familiar with that feeling of uncertainty during our fantasy football drafts. Not having a game plan or knowing if your picks align with your league settings can be daunting. This year, eliminate that uncertainty with the Cheat Sheet Creator. It's your personal guide to creating the perfect rankings tailored specifically for your league. Visualize the path to victory as you add tiers and sync your league to craft customized rankings. The Cheat Sheet Creator adapts to your unique league settings, ensuring that every pick is strategic. Transform your draft day into a confident and enjoyable experience. Use the Cheat Sheet Creator at fantasypros.com/draftwizard or on our Fantasy Football Draft Wizard app and dominate your draft. Let's begin at the wide receiver position, and there's no better place to start than with the captain of our safest player team, Mike Evans of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. 10 NFL seasons for Mike Evans, 10 1,000-yard seasons for Mike Evans. He has averaged 1,168 yards and 9.4 touchdowns per season over what figures to be a Hall of Fame career. Remember how people were fading Evans last year because they were worried about whether Evans would click with quarterback Baker Mayfield? Evans was being drafted outside the top 30 at the wide receiver position. According to Fantasy Pros historic ADP data, he wound up finishing wide receiver 7 in PPR scoring, wide receiver 4 in standard scoring, with 79 catches, 1,255 yards, and 13 touchdowns. Evans turns 31 in August, but he has shown no signs of slowing down and remains one of the best contested catch artists in the league. They don't get much safer than Mike Evans. Next up, Jaylen Waddle of the Miami Dolphins. Waddle has been in the league for 3 years, and he has cleared 1,000 yards in each of those seasons. He's done it despite playing the last 2 seasons with Tyreek Hill, who's drawn 170 and 171 targets in his first 2 years with the Dolphins. Think about that. Tyreek Hill has been one of the biggest target hogs in football over the last 2 years, with more than 1,700 receiving yards in each of those seasons. And Waddle still produced 1,000-yard seasons. He even managed to do it last year despite missing 3 games. Waddle's efficiency numbers show just how good he is. 10.7 yards per target over the last 2 years and almost 2.5 yards per route run over the last 2 years. And by the way, the Miami defense could be terrible this year after losing a number of key players in free agency, along with defensive coordinator Vic Fangio. That means Miami might be in a lot of high-scoring shootouts, which bodes well for all the components of the Miami passing game. Jaylen Waddle looks like a high-floor option for 2024. DK Metcalf of the Seattle Seahawks is being drafted as a mid-range wide receiver 2 this season, and he seems like a value based on his track record. Metcalf's yearly finishes in PPR fantasy scoring over the last 4 years: wide receiver 7, wide receiver 14, wide receiver 16, and wide receiver 21. Metcalf is one of the most remarkable physical specimens in the league, so maybe it shouldn't be a surprise that he's missed only 1 game in 5 NFL seasons. He's averaged 1,066 yards and 8.6 touchdowns this season. DK Metcalf is a very safe option at wide receiver, and this is the most affordable he's been since his rookie year in 2019. Amari Cooper of the Cleveland Browns has topped 1,100 receiving yards in each of the last 2 seasons and 4 of the last 5. Cooper had 78 catches, 1,160 yards, and 9 touchdowns in his first season with the Browns in 2022, then had 72 catches, 1,250 yards, and 5 touchdowns last year. Cooper has averaged 14.8 fantasy points per game since joining the Browns, PPR scoring. And it's worth noting that Amari Cooper was really the only pass catcher on the Browns who clicked with quarterback Deshaun Watson last year. Before Watson's season-ending injury, Cooper had 90 or more receiving yards in 4 of the 5 games Watson started and finished last year. Cooper is being drafted as a low-end wide receiver 2 or high-end wide receiver 3 with an overall ADP outside the top 50. He is a value at that price. Next up, Terry McLaurin of the Washington Commanders. McLaurin has logged 4 straight 1,000-yard seasons with at least 77 catches in all 4 years. He's done that despite playing with mediocre quarterbacks for the entirety of his career. Now, McLaurin gets to play with number 2 overall draft pick Jayden Daniels, who should be at least as good as any of the quarterbacks McLaurin has played with in the NFL so far, and quite possibly a lot better. McLaurin hasn't scored more than 5 touchdowns in any of the last 4 years, but he'll now be playing with a quarterback who threw 31 touchdown passes to wide receivers Malik Nabers and Brian Thomas Jr. in 13 games at LSU last year. And by the way, Commanders offensive coordinator Cliff Kingsbury likes a fast offensive pace, and the Washington defense looks pretty bad, which could lead to a lot of high-scoring track meets for the Commanders. All of it bodes really well for another good season for McLaurin. Diontae Johnson will be playing his first season with the Carolina Panthers. What makes Diontae a safe fantasy play is his ability to consistently command targets. He's averaged 9.0 targets and 5.4 catches a game over the last 4 seasons. After moving from Pittsburgh to Carolina, Johnson will now be the undisputed number 1 receiver for a Panthers offense that could be better now that new head coach and noted quarterback whisperer Dave Canales is going to be working with second-year quarterback Bryce Young. Don't forget that 11 weeks into the 2023 season, Adam Thielen was wide receiver 10 in PPR fantasy scoring as the top receiver for the Panthers, even though Bryce Young was struggling. Thielen was averaging 9.7 targets and 7.6 catches per game over that stretch. That's the sort of target and catch potential Diontae Johnson has for Carolina this year. High target volume makes Diontae Johnson a safe fantasy option, and he's being drafted as a high-end wide receiver 4. The final wide receiver I want to mention is Jakobi Meyers of the Las Vegas Raiders. Now, Meyers doesn't have a sky-high ceiling by any means, but he's the sort of bench player you can feel pretty good about plugging into your lineup when you get hit with injuries or bye weeks. Meyers has had more than 800 yards in each of the last 3 years. He used to be notorious for not scoring touchdowns, but Jakobi Meyers had 8 TDs last year in his first season with the Raiders, which was as many as Davante Adams had. Let's talk about running backs. Derrick Henry goes from the Tennessee Titans to the Baltimore Ravens, and what could be safer than a high-volume running back going to an organization with a long-standing commitment to the running game? The Ravens offense had the highest percentage of running plays in the league last year, 49.9%, and they've led the league in that category in 3 of the last 5 seasons. Derrick Henry has scored double-digit touchdowns in each of his last 6 seasons, averaging 13.7 TDs a year over that span. He's also topped 1,000 rushing yards in 5 of the last 6 years, only falling short of that mark when he missed 9 games in 2021, and even then, Henry had 937 rushing yards in 8 games. Playing with ultra-mobile quarterback Lamar Jackson is probably going to give Henry a nice efficiency boost. The biggest concern with Henry is his age. He's 30 years old, so he's well past the midpoint of the RB age curve, but Henry is just built differently. He's led the league in carries in 4 of the last 5 seasons and really hasn't shown any signs of slowing down. Joe Mixon is another off-season team changer. Mixon went from one good AFC offense to another, going from the Bengals to the Texans. Mixon is going to be the undisputed number 1 running back in Houston. He's cranked out more than 1,200 yards from scrimmage in each of the last 3 years and in 5 of the last 6 years. Mixon has also scored 8 or more touchdowns in 5 of the last 6 seasons, missing the mark only in 2020 when he was limited to 6 games by injury. Since 2018, Joe Mixon has averaged 92 scrimmage yards per game. He just turned 28, so by no means is Mixon over the hill. He looks like a safe option for 2024. Next up is James Conner of the Arizona Cardinals, and we should probably start with the caveat that no player in fantasy football is truly safe in a sport with alarmingly high injury rates. James Conner has missed 24 games in 7 NFL seasons and has never played a full season. That's the bad news. The good news is that Conner is the undisputed lead back in what should be an improved Arizona offense. The Cardinals did spend a day 2 draft pick on Florida State running back Trey Benson, but based on comments made by Cardinals head coach Jonathan Gannon in the early days of training camp, it sounds like Benson is not quite ready for prime time. In 3 seasons with the Cardinals, Connor has averaged 83.3 yards from scrimmage per game, and he's been a consistent touchdown scorer, cranking out 35 TDs in 41 games for Arizona. Next up, David Montgomery of the Detroit Lions. The ceiling is limited for Montgomery due to the presence of explosive second-year running back Jahmyr Gibbs, but the floor for Monty is very sturdy. Since entering the league in 2019, Montgomery has never failed to collect 1,000 yards from scrimmage. Here are his yardage totals over the last 3 years: 1,150, 1,117, 1,132. Montgomery is going to be affordable in drafts because he shares a backfield with Gibbs, but from the time Montgomery returned from a rib injury in Week 10 of 2023 through the playoffs, he averaged 13.7 carries per game, and Gibbs was playing in all of those games. Montgomery also runs behind one of the best offensive lines in the league. Devin Singletary of the New York Giants has an unfettered path to lead back status for the New York Giants. The perpetually underrated Singletary has rolled up at least 956 yards from scrimmage in all 5 of his NFL seasons. His yardage totals over the last 3 years: 1,098, 1,099, 1,091. Wow, talk about a metronome of production. Singletary has an ADP of RB31, which seems way too low for a running back who's that consistent and is in line for a prominent role. Now we have to sneak a tight end onto this list, so let's go with Evan Engram of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Engram had 114 catches for 963 yards and 4 touchdowns last season. I'm not going to guarantee another 100-catch season for Engram, but it seems like a good bet that he'll once again be a big part of the Jaguars' offense, especially after the Jags lost wide receiver Calvin Ridley in free agency. Let's wrap up with a couple of quarterbacks. Brock Purdy of the San Francisco 49ers may have been the last pick of the 2022 NFL Draft, but he's established himself as a solid starter in one of the league's best offenses, and that's what makes Purdy so safe. The infrastructure around him is just so good. 49ers head coach Kyle Shanahan is one of the best play callers in the league. Purdy gets to throw to Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, George Kittle, and Christian McCaffrey. The 49ers run the ball very effectively, which makes play action that much more effective for Purdy. Last year, Purdy averaged 9.6 yards per attempt, best in the league. He was also number 1 in the league in passer rating. Purdy completed 69.4% of his throws for 4,280 yards and 31 touchdowns. He quietly finished QB6 in fantasy scoring and looks like a very safe play for 2024. And finally, let's talk about Jared Goff of the Detroit Lions. Goff's numbers the last 2 years have been very similar: 4,438 passing yards and 29 TD passes in 2022, 4,575 passing yards and 30 TD passes in 2023. Goff was QB10 in fantasy scoring in 2022, QB7 last year. Now, everyone knows that Jared Goff is an indoor cat. Does a quarterback belong on a safest players list if he often struggles in outdoor games? Well, yes, as long as the quarterback isn't going to play in many outdoor games. The good news for Goff investors is that he's only scheduled to play 3 games outdoors all season: at Green Bay in November and at Chicago and San Francisco in December. The indoor cat is going to be hopped up on catnip for most of the season. Those are the safest players in 2024 fantasy football drafts. Make sure you add some of those players to your roster to balance out some of your riskier, high upside draft picks.